Alright, so hello and welcome back. So, I saw this video on the Armchair Historian, and I thought I should react to it because this is a subject. So, basically, this is going to be the fall of the German Empire, the Hundred Days Offensive, which is also known as the kaiserschlacht, which is basically the Kaiser's Offensive. And this is a part of, Operation Michael is a part of this, which was Germany's last hoorah attempt to win World War One before the Americans arrived. Basically, was this offensive? It was their last shot. They pulled everything they could together and launched out an all-out offensive on the Western Front to try and break them before the Americans got there. And yes, I do know a hell of a lot about this operation, mostly because I had one of the best professors teach me about it. And I did a lot of research on this. So hopefully I can gain you some insight if they miss anything, but I don't think they will. As always, their stuff's in the description. My Patreon is there if you so wish. Otherwise, let's get to it.
Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. During the final months of the First World War, a series of Allied offensives finally broke the bloody stalemate on the Western Front. Civil unrest in Germany surged, while its demoralized and exhausted armies were sent into a headlong retreat. Kaiser Wilhelm II was forced to abdicate in the face of imminent revolution, and on November 11, 1918, the new German Republic signed a humiliating armistice which saw much of its former territory partitioned by the victorious nations. Various circumstances had influenced the empire's collapse, but it was the unrelenting pressure from the massive Allied offensives that had proven most fatal. Today, we are taking a closer look at what is known as the 100 Days Offensive, the offensive that ended the German Empire.
Yes, he's talking about in the beginning about basically how this ends, which is the Kaiser has to abdicate and the Weimar Republic is formed and all of that stuff. But yes, this was the last 100-day offensive for Germany. And after this offensive, it didn't end for Germany. They still had, again, they kept fighting afterwards, but this was the last time they could actually launch any offensives.
The year 1918 started with a series of political earthquakes in Germany. The United States had entered the war 1 year prior on the side of the Allies, and a German defeat seemed inevitable. On the home front, thousands of war-weary, starving German citizens took to the streets to protest the once glorious conflict that now seemed little more than a meat grinder supplied by the nation's youth.
Yes. Also, at this time, the Allied blockade cannot be underestimated how badly this affected Germany, especially by the time when 1918, which is what this is. It was very bad. There was almost no food. Materials were in shortage pretty much everywhere, and people were sick of it. They may not cover this, but basically the German fleet, what was left of it after the Battle of Jutland, was told to basically go out and do one last glorious hoorah. And the sailors said, "No, fuck that. We're not doing this. We're not dying because for your honor and pride. We're not doing it." And they revolted. And then there's a whole bunch of communist uprisings. And let's just, needless to say, break down that this shit was getting bad and it was already terrible. That's why they had to do one last offensive and get this over with, because they couldn't last any longer under the blockade.
But right when all seemed lost, miraculous news arrived from the Eastern Front. The nascent Soviet Union had signed a peace treaty with Germany, officially ending its participation in the war.
The Treaty of Brescilithols. Basically, there was a whole bunch of satellite nations that Russia had to give up, and they had to give a fuck ton of territory, and they signed an armistice with Germany. So Germany was able to pull out all of their divisions that were fighting in the east and reroute them to the west. Austria-Hungary was also able to do this, but it didn't fucking help them. But Germany was fighting a two-front war basically for 4 years, and now they could concentrate everything in the Western Front and launch a massive offensive against the West before the Americans got there. Once the Americans got there, that's it. It's over. The Germans knew that. Everyone basically knew that.
The commander of the German army, General Erich Ludendorff, suddenly sensed an opportunity to end the war before morale broke down and American troops in Europe could arrive in force. Having freed up his forces on the Eastern Front, he quickly seized the opportunity to prepare a massive spring offensive against the Western Allies.
Okay, so it was Hindenburg in charge. Okay, he was the commander. He was the CIC, so commander in chief. But Ludendorff was his second, and Ludendorff was very important. Ludendorff is the guy that did all the fucking logistics and everything to make this shit happen. Hindenburg did a lot of the planning and a lot of the speaking, the majority of the operational planning, but Ludendorff did fucking everything else. Those two were a pair. By this time period, those two were basically running Germany. The Kaiser didn't have any power. It was just Ludendorff and Hindenburg and other generals, but really just those two that were actually in charge of Germany at this point. Everything went to the military at this point, trying to do this offensive.
The plan for Operation Michael was to deliver a knockout blow to the British Expeditionary Force in the Somme-Arras sector, driving the Tommies back to the English Channel. Ludendorff assured the German people that final victory was now, once again, finally imminent.
And as he said, this is Operation Michael. So Operation Michael was a part of this. It was the first operation. There's 4. And there might be more, but 4 major ones. But Operation Michael is the centerpiece, which is basically we need to drive the British into the sea. And this is, again, NSIG is final victory. But just remember, Operation Michael was the first bit, and let's just say it didn't go very fucking well.
On March 21st, an elite vanguard of specially trained German stormtroopers advanced across no man's land and found themselves aided by a thick layer of fog as they infiltrated deep into the British lines. The stunned British were put on the back foot as German morale soared, but the offensive gradually petered out in the face of logistical issues, tactical mistakes, and the timely arrival of French reinforcements. Unwilling to concede, an agitated Ludendorff doubled down and launched a series of increasingly costly and incoherent follow-up offensives, which...
Okay, so let me stop him right there. We'll back up a little bit. So, yes, Operation Michael was launched. Operation Michael was initially succeeding. They fucking hammered, excuse my French, they fucking hammered the British lines real bad. With their stormtroopers, because these guys were the best of the best they had left, and they sent them in and they did their job well. But the problem was, as you have to keep advancing, their momentum is starting to drop. They're starting to lose ammo and all of this stuff. But their first actual contact with British lines completely overwhelmed them. This is part of the nature, really, in 1918 for general offensives. Usually the first little bit is good, and then it starts to slow down. And as they said, it started to slow down, and then they started throwing operations into them, and it just started to fall apart real quick.
Increasingly costly and incoherent follow-up offensives, which, although they saw tactical successes, ultimately failed to achieve operational breakthroughs.
So when he's talking about tactical successes, in case anybody's unfamiliar, there's three types of theaters. Tactical, operational, and strategic, okay? So when they're referring to tactical, it's tactical victory means that in an operational space of like around like 10-ish miles, just in that little area, just like specifically that battle, there was a tactical victory they won, okay? But as he said, they didn't do anything operationally. Operationally is like whole divisions and corps, okay? And then, you know, above that, strategic victories are fucking like knocking Russia out of the war and shit. So they failed. They got tactical victory, which really doesn't mean much. Let's be honest here. Operational victories really do matter, but they couldn't do it.
Although they saw tactical successes, ultimately failed to achieve operational breakthroughs. When the dust had finally settled on July 18th, the exhausted and stretched out Germans had suffered some 700,000 casualties, while the Allies had to contend with a combined loss of nearly 865,000 men of their own.
That's pretty fucking impressive considering, right? The Germans took 700,000 casualties, which is a mind-boggling number. But the Allies took more, and they're the ones defending in World War I, which is fucking mind-boggling that they actually took more.
Although a numeric victory, the depleted German Empire could ill afford to replace their losses, while the Allies could count on 250,000 fresh American troops arriving on the continent each month. To make matters worse, the onset of the Spanish influenza hit the German lines hard, with over 1 million soldiers falling ill between May and July alone. And when, on July 20th, French units under General Ferdinand Foch forced the battered...
Ferdinand Foch? I don't think so. But yes, the Spanish influenza that's not really talked about fucking hit everyone terribly. It's called the Nebraska virus? Arkansas. I can't think it's coming. I think it started in Arkansas. You can let me know. But yeah, the Spanish influenza, it did a hell of a lot of damage to operations that were taking place in World War I and killed a lot of fucking people.
Germans to retreat from the River Marne, the stage seemed set for the Allies to pull an Uno reverse card and embark on an offensive of their own.
Okay, so yes, at this point, it was they're fucked. They knew it. Hindenburg and Ludendorff, which were basically the commanders of Germany at this point, they knew they're fucked. After Operation Michael failed and the Kaiserschlacht failed, that's it. They had no reserves left. They had no way of winning. All they were going to do was try and maybe get a better peace deal. That's all they were trying to hope for at this point. On the German side was basically just a better peace deal. If we can hold them off for a little bit longer, maybe we can get a better peace deal and not get not lose the Kaiser and all of that shit. Okay, but as we're gonna watch, that's not what's gonna fucking happen.
Gathered at the town of Bonbon, the Allied commanders agreed to a series of limited attacks across the front. The Amiens salient was to be the site of the first push, as the open and hard terrain there was considered to be especially favorable for tank maneuvers, and the German forces in the area were considered to be only lightly entrenched and suffering from poor morale. The veteran Canadian and Australian Corps were tapped to shoulder the main weight of the offensive. In contrast to their German opponents, they were well rested, highly motivated, and equipped with some 500 tanks.
And they're the best goddamn troops they had. Okay, so the problem, I'll get into this a little bit. So Canada, Australia, two of the best shock. They're both colonial units, and they're both on the Western Front. They're both basically the shock units. You can break through fucking lines with these guys. You're gonna see. I don't know if I'll talk about it after this fucking offensive. They couldn't do anything. They're out. They had no more men. They lost everything in this last offensive. But they beat the shit out of the German lines, and they're not really remembered as much for some fucking reason. But yeah, these guys were invaluable as shock troops, and that's what they were used for.
Highly motivated and equipped with some 500 tanks, including the new Mark V. In addition, the attack would be supported by a well-prepared mass of artillery and would enjoy clear air superiority. To maintain the element of surprise, the appearance was given that the Canadians would strike in Flanders instead. As a result, German intelligence had little notion of what was to come. On August 8th at 4:20 a.m., 2,000 Allied guns rudely woke the Germans with a devastating bombardment that silenced the majority of German artillery pieces. So stunned were the defenders by the shelling that the Canadians and Australians were upon them before they had a chance to recover. To the south, the French First Army saw similar success and made rapid gains.
Yeah, so they just fucking bombarded the artillery positions, took them out, and bombarded their line. As you can see, we all think World War I was not a war of movement, which it really wasn't until you go to the East, but in 1918 it fucking was. They were using aircraft, artillery, tanks, infantry support, combined arms to fucking smash through lines that were previously impossible. So they weren't, sending men to their deaths in barbed wire at this point. It's a little bit different.
In the meantime, German General Georg von der Marwitz frantically tried to figure out what was going on as his reserve forces struggled to get past the remnants of the shattered frontline divisions. However, by the end of the day, the Allied forces had reached their objectives and had advanced close to 8 miles, or almost 13 kilometers, into enemy territory.
Now that's fucking unheard of in 1915 and 16, but yeah, that's normal for fucking 1918.
According to von der Marwitz, the aggressive use of tanks, which he called evil weapons, had been the major factor in the decimation of the defending German Second Army. Moreover, their rapid advance into the enemy's rear left the neighboring 18th Army's flank positionally unhinged and served as an indicator for the way tanks would be utilized in the next war.
That's important to remember because a lot of the fucking shit that was used in World War II with the Blitzkrieg and everything with tanks, the French using tanks for infantry support, and the British having technically an own armored division, kind of armored regiment, and then Germany having their own armored divisions, comes directly from this fucking offensive, basically. Was when they got it was everybody learning their tanks, and at this point they're using them for en masse on specific targets and breaking through. Okay, now they don't cover this. This is an A7V, in case anybody's wondering, and this is a Mark 6 British tank. Just remember that these come in male and female. The females have machine guns. The males have cannons. There's also another one called the Whippet. It goes a little bit faster. It's basically just a machine gun thing. Also, the fact that during this offensive, cavalry was used. Cavalry was used to, again, as they said, once they broke through the line, to fucking go around and actually do their job, which was harass supply lines and keep the momentum going. and that's what they were used for. Didn't really have motorized stuff. You had cavalry, so cavalry actually got to do their job, technically.
German losses that day were so high that the 8th of August would become known as the Black Day, after having lost a staggering 48,000 men on top of 400 guns and hundreds of machine guns and trench mortars.
Just to put that in perspective, that's basically a whole fucking corps that's just gone. At this point, it's a whole corps gone. It depends on how you structure your stuff, but division size, maybe 2 divisions. It's basically a corps gone. Just in fucking casualties.
Fueled by this unprecedented success, the Allies widened the attack on the northern and southern shoulder. Although the British and French armies managed to push on for several more miles the following day, the advance was slowed due to the fact that the supporting artillery simply could not keep pace with the infantry, and many tanks were beginning to suffer mechanical failures.
Another thing is the artillery is limited by fucking horse transport. They don't have self-propelled artillery, which is basically an artillery gun on something that can drive and go forward. They didn't have that. Okay, well, the French had something like that for 155s, but that's so tiny it doesn't matter. The 2,000 artillery guns they used, again, they can't move them unless they have horses, and those horses are going to get stuck, and it takes too long to get the fucking artillery up, which is why the offensive stalls out a little bit, and also the tanks break down. Because again, when you're working with something that's so new, it's so mechanically different, and it just, mechanics of World War I stuff really is unreliable, let's be honest with ourselves. So
the Australians, in the meantime, were pinned down at the village of Hamel by German artillery fire coming from the Shippee Ridge. The shelling from the heights would continue until the end of the day, when a daring assault by elements of the 33rd U.S. Infantry silenced the guns.
Yes, 33rd U.S. Infantry did support them. There's actually a famous photo of it. I'll see if I can find it. But yes, there is a photo of them doing this fucking heroic shit. So the Americans were here at this point. So,
however, by the end of August 10th, the advance had ground to a final halt as arriving German reinforcements managed to stabilize the situation and Allied supply lines were stretched thin. Nevertheless, the offensive had been a major success, as the town of Montdidier, which had been the offensive's main objective, had been encircled by the French, and all the territory that the Germans had gained during Operation Michael had been retaken in a matter of days. At the German Supreme Army Command, or the OHL, the mood had turned sour. The previously triumphant Ludendorff now advised the Kaiser that Germany ought to seek a negotiated peace. The German army would, however, need to hold its present ground on French soil in order to obtain favorable terms.
As I've said, yeah, but again, they're not talking about Hindenburg, but Hindenburg was the guy in charge. Ludendorff was his second, doing fucking amazing work keeping the goddamn army together. If Ludendorff wasn't there, fucking Hindenburg would have lost the army, but Ludendorff again, And the Kaiser, yeah, basically, hey Kaiser, you need to fucking get a peace deal now because it's not going to hold together much longer.
In an urgent meeting with Reich Chancellor Georg von Hertling and the Kaiser, the leaders of the OHL, General Ludendorff and Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg, insisted that the army would be able to do so provided the German people continued to support them. On the other side of no man's land, General Foch had gotten an appetite for victory and urged the Allied commanders to press the attack into the Somme region. His colleagues, however, cautioned against this idea, as intelligence had indicated that the German positions in the area had now been significantly reinforced. Unwilling to consider alternative plans, the unyielding Frenchman ultimately got his way, and on the 21st of August, the British Third Army under General Sir Julian Byng advanced through a thick layer of fog into the battle-scarred territory that had haunted the Tommies 2 years prior. Although initially aided by the lack of visibility, the attack gradually slowed down as entire waves of men lost their way in the mist. As expected, German resistance was stiff and losses were high, especially among the tanks, and the advance was finally stopped dead in its tracks in the face of relentless artillery fire.
That's a nice detail. They have the guys with trench. They wouldn't be fucking running with these guns, but yes, the trench mags basically hold 20 fucking rounds in the rifle.
Nonetheless, the British advanced 3 miles, or nearly 5 kilometers, in one day, and managed to secure several of their objectives in the process. In the following days, a renewed push saw the further capture of Albert and Bapaume, and carried the Australian Corps to the banks of the Somme River, which they reached on August 31st. After having found a lone railhead among the destroyed bridges and railways on the river, the massed Aussies queued up to continue their unparalleled advance, and by September 4th, the men from a land down under had smashed the German defensive line at the battles of Mont-Saint-Quentin and Péronne.
And if I remember correctly, one of the fucking reasons the Australians were able to do, again, the Australians fucking amazing, but these guys were technically, if I remember correctly, could be very fucking wrong here, but they're all volunteers. On the Western Front, if I remember correctly, they were all volunteers. Every single one that went here was a fucking volunteer. And they did not want conscription. None of these guys wanted conscripts with them, okay? Because they wanted everyone as fucking volunteers with them here. But I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. But yeah. These guys, again, shock troops. By the end of this offensive, they basically didn't have any manpower left because they're all gone.
With the Germans now in a headlong retreat from the Somme, the Allied armies were in position to attack the famed Hindenburg Line, the final German defensive position on the Western Front. The following...
And it was. The Hindenburg Line was the final defensive position. Germany was more near Paris before, in 1917 and 16. Because they got there in, 1914 and then 1915. But they pulled back to the Hindenburg Line, right? In 1916, 1917. 1917 to basically hold out against the Allies to a more defensive position. They had to give up some ground. And once you break through the Hindenburg Line, there's literally nothing fucking stopping you from just pushing on.
Final German defensive position on the Western Front. The following month brought more bad news for the Kaiser, as his retreating armies were caught with their pants down on several occasions. At Saint-Mihiel, the American First Army, with support from the elite French Second Colonial Corps, completely overwhelmed the withdrawing Germans. News arriving from Germany's allies was equally catastrophic. The Austro-Hungarians had started sending peace proposals to the United States, and the Bulgarians were similarly pleading for a ceasefire in the face of imminent military collapse on the Salonika front. Faced with a whopping 460,000 casualties in the months of August and September alone, Ludendorff was noted to be on the verge of a nervous breakdown.
Oh yeah, no, not just on the verge. He was having a fucking nervous breakdown. I can't even fault the man. Everything is going to fucking shit. Hindenburg had to calm him down. Because if he wasn't there, my god, yeah, it would have been fucking over.
On the front line, the mood had soured too. Peering towards no man's land, demoralized German soldiers now awaited inescapable defeat or death. The anticipated Allied assault on the Hindenburg Line came in the final week of September. On the 26th, a combined Franco-American force advanced up the thickly wooded hillsides of the Argonne Forest. Although conscious of the difficult terrain and intricate defenses in front of his men, U.S. General John J. Pershing intended to force his way through the 61,000 defenders with his numerically overwhelming assault force of 330,000.
John fucking Pershing. Okay, if you ever want a guy, my opinion on one American general that I think was dog shit and he shouldn't have been in command, is General Blackjack Pershing. He thought war was something fucking else. For example, he didn't like logistics at all. He said it was beneath him and he didn't like fucking doing it. So he appointed one of his captains to do it. And that captain was Marshall. So I think it's John C. Marshall. But basically, General Marshall, okay? General Marshall, World War II, was the chief of staff of the entire United States fucking army, okay? Actually, I think he was chief of staff of the entire United States military. I think. Army, chief of staff, okay? For the whole U.S. military. And he was the guy that did literally the entire logistics for fucking the entire U.S. Army in World War I. I'm not shitting you. He was the captain that did that, okay? Pershing thought it was beneath him. So he gave it to him. And you can see, Marshall's very good in World War II for what he does. But yeah, Blackjack Pershing's a piece of shit. Okay?
Although seeing some initial success, the advance of the inexperienced Americans ground down to a crawl in the face of tenacious resistance and the arrival of significant German reinforcements, and the fighting in the forest would continue right up until the end of the war. To the north, America's allies had more success, with the Canadian Corps capturing the Canal du Nord on the 27th, and General Foch launching an assault on the Saint-Quentin Canal 2 days later. The canal formed a formidable obstacle at 35 feet or nearly 11 meters wide, littered with barbed wire. After shelling the area for several days with thousands of guns, a joint American, Australian, and British force crept forward. To cover the advance, Allied artillery fired some 30,000 rounds of mustard gas toward the German defenders, whose understrength divisions had by that time been reduced to the size of regiments. Still,
Jesus Christ, that's terrible.
Gas toward the German defenders, whose understrength divisions had by that time been reduced to the size of regiments.
Okay, so when he's talking about that, so regiment size at maximum is 3,000 men. A fucking division can be up 20 to 40,000 people. So when a division goes down to 3,000 men, you know you're really fucked here. Also, again, this is just some fucking insane warfare for World War One. They're moving, they're shooting, they're communicating, they're going across fucking barges across a goddamn canal to accomplish their mission.
9th Corps to the south managed to cross the canal and capture the Riekeval Bridge. The feared Hindenburg line had been broken, and the Allies now possessed a crucial supply line to advance even further into German-held territory. The intensity of the attacks in the south forced the Germans to pivot crucial forces away from other sectors of the front. This opened up lucrative opportunities for the opposing Allied armies to advance in places that had been at a standstill for years. At the Ypres salient, which had been the site of 4 major battles in the years prior, the combined British-Belgian force broke out on the 28th of September and overran the lightly held German lines in a single day, netting another 10,000 prisoners.
Yeah, as you can see, the whole fucking German line is collapsing. It's just gone. It's just gone.
Further south, at Cambrai, the British also sensed opportunity and pressed the attack. The withdrawing German defenders attempted to buy time.
True. Cambrai was been the first site of the first mass tank attack in history about a year prior. True. The Battle of Cambrai was like that, where they basically were actually in mass tanks and used them in mass to break some line. And you can see here, they're using them very effectively now when they learned it.
By booby-trapping the area, even setting fire to the town itself, but they too were quickly overrun. With the Hindenburg line decisively broken and the Imperial Army in disarray, Ludendorff realized that the war was now inevitably lost. In the north, Belgian, French, and British forces in the Ypres sector further exploited their breakthrough by pushing deeper into Flanders. They were met with little resistance from the exhausted and demoralized Germans, and by mid-October, the British Fourth Army had crossed the River Selle with ease. Meanwhile, the situation on the German home front began to move in tandem with the rapid breakdown on the front. In early October, the newly appointed Chancellor of Germany, Maximilian von Baden, initiated negotiations with the American government of President Woodrow Wilson to request an immediate ceasefire.
Okay, now he did this, I don't know if I talk about it. He did this because he knew for a fact the Americans would take less from them. And he knew that, and that's what they wanted. They wanted the Americans to come in here and fucking save their asses, because the British and French were going to destroy their country. That's what they thought was going to happen. That's kind of basically what did happen. Woodrow Wilson, long story short, besides him being one of the worst fucking presidents ever, he fucking he saw himself as a peacemaker, and like everyone should sing Kumbaya, and he should do it. Okay, he's the one leading them. So that's why I went to him to do the surrender, because they have a better fucking peace deal.
But when the German government conceded to demands for political reforms and unconditional surrender, the OHL lashed out by flat-out rejecting any of the humiliating terms proposed by the Wilson government, and instead ordered its troops to fight on until the bloody end.
Yeah, and that would be about a month from now, so you can know that fucking happened.
To break the deadlock, Baden convinced the Kaiser to dismiss Ludendorff from the OHL on October 26th. A day later, the German government accepted Wilson's conditions for an armistice. However, the wheels of revolution were already turning, and these developments did but little to temper the growing civil unrest. On the very day the conditions were accepted, a mutiny broke out in Wilhelmshaven when hundreds of sailors refused to weigh anchor for one final suicide clash with the Royal Navy.
That's exactly what the fuck happened, and there was also communist uprising there too, but yeah.
Within a week, their ranks grew to some 40,000 heavily armed men who now occupied much of the city's civil and military institutions and were demanding the abdication of the Kaiser as well as radical political reforms. With the authorities unwilling and incapable of stopping them, revolutionary unrest spread like wildfire into the interior, even reaching as far as the southern kingdom of Bavaria. On November 8th, its war-weary population ousted its king Ludwig III and declared itself a Volksstaat, or the People's State of Bavaria.
Okay, so something fucking interesting here is they didn't... The people that did this bullshit, communism. Okay, this is literally just a fucking communist state at this point. By the end, yeah, so the people of Bavaria didn't really agree with what the fuck was happening here. Like, this shit got put down anyway, so it didn't fucking matter. But they did get rid of their monarch, but a lot of the people still supported their monarch of Bavaria. Okay, not the Kaiser. The Kaiser was a piece of shit and they all wanted him gone. But the king of Bavaria, they still wanted around. It was just some radical elements that barely, but like 1% did this bullshit, and it got put down later, so.
State of Bavaria. On that same day, panicked government officials in Berlin could see with their own bulging eyes that the situation was in danger of completely spiraling out of control. Baden urged the Kaiser to abdicate immediately to preempt a revolutionary triumph. The latter consented to giving up his title as King of Germany and set out to prepare an official declaration.
I can't remember if this happened. Okay, so there was one of the general staff, because nobody wanted to fucking tell the Kaiser the war was over. One of the guys went up and did it. He's actually pretty famous after the war, but I don't remember his name. He's like, look, guy, this war's over. I don't know what the fuck you want from us. You need to abdicate. You need to get the fuck out of here and sign the peace and give it over to the chancellor. And the Kaiser's like, no. I will go out there and wave my sword around on a cavalry in one defiant fucking charge. This is how delusional he was. He'll like, I will beat them off. And he's like, my Kaiser, if you do that, no one will fucking follow you. Not a single infantryman will follow you.
The impatient and unsatisfied chancellor decided to take matters into his own hands, taking the stage to not only announce the abdication of the Kaiser as both the King of Germany, but also the King of Prussia, as well as the Crown Prince's renunciation of rights to both titles. With the Kaiser gone, the conditions for signing the armistice were finally met. However, the German delegation was in no position to demand any significant amendments in its final terms, which among other things demanded hefty reparations to the Allies and the ceding of much of the former empire's territory. Despite this, the new German government instructed them to sign the armistice regardless, and on November 11th at 5 a.m. an agreement was reached. Exactly 6 hours later, the guns that had ceaselessly roared for over 4 years finally fell silent.
And they missed the part of it was signed at 5 a.m. for a ceasefire, because it didn't end. That was an actual peace treaty. That was just a ceasefire to stop the fucking killing. It started at 5 and wouldn't go into effect until 11 a.m. that morning. And there's a very famous fucking video of people dying. There's a whole series of offensives that were still launched, even though they could have called them off. They could have called them off, but they didn't. They kept going to get more glory, more prestige. I can't tell you if I was told, hey, we're going into a massive offensive again. And I'm like, but the war's over in literally 6 hours. I don't want to die the last day of this war 6 hours from now. Can we sit here? They're like, nope, get your ass up. We're going. It's fucking monumentally stupid. There is no defense of this. You could give an argument that there could be a defense for a delay of like 2 to 3 hours to get the message out, but not 11. Not 11 in the morning. So many people died needlessly on this last day. It really does piss me off.
And the bloody war that had cost the lives of millions had come to a sudden end. Although various factors played a role in the fall of the German Empire, it was the unrelenting pressure of the Allied Hundred Days Offensive which ultimately broke the Eagles' back. With Ludendorff's promise of imminent victory bombarded to a crisp, the exhausted German people had finally had enough.
I wouldn't say it was Ludendorff's fault. Not when you dig into it. Hindenburg and Ludendorff, I mean, they both knew this was fucked. Ludendorff was having a fucking panic attack. But yeah, this 4 years of attritional warfare, 4 years of a blockade, the last offensive, and then this is the last thing that broke the German Empire apart, basically.
Had finally had enough. The end of the First World War, however, did not immediately bring peace to the German homeland. From his new home in the Netherlands, the former Kaiser helplessly watched as his empire descended into a bitter revolution, which would not finally end until August of the following year with the ratification of the Weimar Constitution. The new government, however, would prove equally ill-equipped to deal with the many social and political hardships that lay ahead.
Yeah, so again, 1919 is when, because again, all these states were popping off, communist uprisings were fucking happening, and then again, eventually the Weimar Republic was able to get his head out of his ass and actually form a constitution that barely didn't elect a king, because a lot of fucking people wanted it. Most of Germany still wanted a Kaiser. Okay, this is an idea that people don't understand today. Is people still wanted a head of state that was a king. They just didn't want the Kaiser because he's fucking retarded. His son, there was a lot of options. A lot of them did like the King of Bavaria to be the King of Germany, but narrowly, because the guys that were in charge of it, they narrowly passed a vote to have completely abdicate and not have a king anymore. But yeah, the Republic was very unstable at this point until well past 1919, in my opinion, because the Freikorps happened and a whole bunch of other shit too.
And its disgruntled population would soon look to a more radical alternative to put their humiliated nation back on the top.
I wouldn't say it was. The radical elements really did not come until 1929, before the Great fucking Depression happened. It had been building throughout the Weimar Republic, but again, Nazi Germany really does come in real quick and fucking flip the switch. But it had been building. I could get into a whole debate just on the Weimar Republic thing, but yeah.
Thanks again to Iron Order.
Okay, so I think that's the end of the video. Hopefully you enjoyed my reaction. This is a subject I know a lot of fucking about, and especially the Weimar Republic. It is one of my favorite time periods, you could probably tell. So yeah, correct me on my stuff that I said I would, that I don't fully know, if you want, and leave some comments, and I hope we will have a confident debate and not scream at each other in the comment section. Otherwise, leave a like and tell me if you like this type of content. Otherwise, you people have a nice day.